Jerry Acuff in a nice jacket. I'm here all scraggled, getting out of the hospital, and now you're making me look bad. All the way from Phoenix, best-selling author, old school salesman, VMI grad, football player. Welcome to the Sales Podcast. How the heck are you?
I'm really excited to be here, Wes. Honestly, it's anytime you can talk to somebody who knows probably more than you do about something, you ought to do it. I'm talking to you, and I know from what I've researched, you've got a great knowledge of what sales really is. A lot of people don't.
A lot of people do not. There's a lot of misconceptions about what selling is. Would you agree?
It's just interesting you say that because one of the things I wrote in one of my sales books, I said, the less you care about the sale, the more you sell. Now, in my mind, what you have to be good at is it's your job. If I can actually learn how do I communicate with somebody so they actually want to communicate with me, I got a shot. But I am fascinated by the number of companies that we do business with. And we've been in business 24 years, and we do business with probably 20% of the top 100 companies in the world. It's amazing to me how many do not have a organizational definition of selling.
Mm.
And I'm like, if you don't have an organizational definition of selling, it's harder to actually coach salespeople because you really don't know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And I learned my definition of selling 30 years ago from Fred Herman.
From who?
Fred Herman.
I don't know that name.
He was, there used to be Conet. They used to have all these tapes and stuff, and I listened to all of them when I was a rep years ago.
Sure.
And, but he said selling is two things. Number one, selling is teaching. He said in every successful sale, some education takes place. Now you're not there to preach to them, but what you're trying to do is to get into a conversation to find out, what are their needs? And if they have a need and you can fill it, great. If they don't, get the hell out of it. The second thing he said is selling is finding out what people want, helping them get it. He said, but the problem with that is most people don't know what they want, but they think they do.
Yep.
And so to me, I say, look, if I'm a manager, and one of the things I'm doing now is I'm creating this program called Sales Leadership and Excellence Development. I call it SLED. But I'm trying to help managers, especially managers who work for companies where their boss doesn't know much about sales. And there's a boatload of them in the country.
Yes.
And so if I have a sales manager, it's not doing well, and I'm a CEO, or I started the company and I'm a doctor, or I'm a dentist, or I'm a whatever, I don't know what to do with that person. So anyway, I created this thing because I do think there's a lot of people that are in that situation. But in my mind, you have to start with the definition of selling. If I know what the definition of selling is, when I'm watching a call, which I do a lot, I'm trying to ask myself, have you found out what they want? If you haven't found out what they really want. Now, the other thing I try and teach people is you have to get people to want to hear what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read Brendan Kane's book, Hook Point? It's an interesting book, and I don't think it's completely and totally germane to what you and I do, but he has a concept in there which I think everybody could benefit from. He said, if you want people to listen to you, you need to practice pattern interruption that makes them want to learn more. And I'm sitting there saying, but we don't do that in sales. We go in and we try and get people to convince that they got to buy our stuff and they need our stuff. And when they really haven't earned the right to have a conversation with the person. And if 80% of sales are closed on the fifth try or after, then what's wrong with spending some time building a relationship with the gatekeeper? That makes no sense to me. Anyway, so I'm really excited about this new program we're doing because it's me for 6 weeks. And when I was a district manager, I hired 20 people in 8 years. The first person I hired, I fired after 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
The other 19, we had 600 reps. I said, in the other 19, 7 of those were the number one rep in the country within 2 years. 13 were in the top. 13 got promoted, and all of them, 19 out of 19, were in the top 50 within 2 years. And so, but I learned an awful lot by just being their boss. The very first person I worked with, he taught me this: don't make me you. I worked with this guy. You'll get a kick out of this one. I worked with this guy, first person I ever hired. I go work with him, and I say, I'll make the calls because he just gone out of training. And I said, I'll make. So I make the call, and we We go back in the car and he says, I can't do that. I said, you can't do what? Well, I can't do what you did. And I said, why not? He said, it's not my style. I said, you got no style, pal. That's why I'm here. And so I made the next call and he said, I can't do that. It's not my style. Now, I spent 3 days with him and he said that 15 times. And on the last day, I said to myself, I got to go back home and I got to figure out how to fire this. So anyway, I go back and he says, well, what do you want me to do while you're gone? I said, we just launched a product and I was leading the country in sales at $5,000 a week per person. Now he had zero. And so he said, what do you want me to do? I said, well, why don't you go get some of these hospital stock, get them to buy our product. And that, because if they don't buy it, they can't use it. So he calls me the next Friday and he says, what do you want me to do with these orders? Now I hadn't figured out how to fire him yet. And Lord knows I'm glad I didn't. And I said, well, what do you mean, the orders? He said, well, you told me to get these orders. I said, how much is it? He said, $26,000. You know what my response was? I like your style. But what I learned from that as my brand new manager was what he was saying is, don't make me you. Let me be my best me. And if you're going to be a great sales leader, you have to understand a lot of stuff about your people because they're not all the same. And you have to figure out which ones, can you push hard, which ones that you need to not lean on, which ones have leadership potential. I mean, of my 13 of mine got promoted. So I think it was pretty good at it. That's why I like this whole thing about managers. We have clients that they're doing away with their ability to train managers about how do you actually make a successful sales call. And I'm saying to myself, that should be the cornerstone of we as leaders. Anyway, that other guy was within 2 years, he was the number one rep in the country out of 600.
It kind of reminds me of that old story of Zig Ziglar, where he had hired that woman to help him do all the setup and stuff because he was selling like the in-home cookware and stuff.
Yeah,
and they would do all the demos, and she would clean, right? And yeah, excuse me, didn't have time to hit the mute there. I got this sore throat. I was under anesthesia. That was the worst part. This thing, 3 days now, it's been tight, but I digress. But something happened. I think he double booked, and he told her, you gotta go fulfill this order. And she's like, oh no, I can't do that. You promised me I would never have to sell. I can't do it. He's like, you have to do it or we're going to let these people down. And, I'm going to look like a liar. She was like, oh, I'll do it this one time. But, if you ever don't ever make me do this again. And, next thing you know, I think she ended up being like the vice president of the company and just unleashed a beast. She loved it, just because she wasn't selling, right? It was just demonstrating, answering questions, having fun in the process. And it was just a natural. People always think like selling is this mean, high pressured, grind away. And it's like, that's not it at all.
Yeah.
Not professional selling.
No, I've written 3 books on relationships and how do you build relationships with people that are difficult. I call it the relationship edge in business. And so we have this pyramid, which basically says there's only 6 levels of relationship that you can have with another person. So you start out by, I don't know, they don't know my name. Well, there's 3 billion people in China. I don't know any of them. The second thing is, my name. Once you know my name, then a lot of things begin to and then I think the third group is people who like. Now, like you means they don't want to date with you, but it means I'm not bothered when you're around. And then after that, it's people who actually want to see you. And then you get up to the top of the level is people who now value a relationship with me. Now, it takes a while to go up that whole step. Now, we have a whole program. How do you do that? We have a document that says, okay, if you're this step, what do you do next? But in my mind, and Brian Tracy talks about this recently, he said, relationships are everything in selling these days. And I'm not sure it's everything, but I think it's a really important thing that people need to do. And I think as a manager, one of the things I learned a long time ago was my people got promoted. And if they got promoted, and I didn't know their best customers. And if I didn't have a relationship with those best customers, I was in trouble. So, I mean, in every district I had, I went around and said, all right, give me the 4 or 5 top people you got, and I want them to go meet them. I want to know them. So when you leave, I don't lose their business.
Yeah, yeah, and that I would say that either doesn't happen or it's done poorly. I would have managers that would feel like they were almost wanting to poach from me. I spent a lot of time in high tech, and there was a lot of turnover in the early 2000s. You know, the whole decade from 2000 2012. Um, I I would hit my number and get laid off because the company's just struggling. You know, I moved out to California in '04 because I had all 18 Western states, and I was living in Austin, and we just had our 5th kid. We're like, let's move back home so at least my wife can be around because I was traveling like crazy. And but you know, over time, they ended up. I think they hired 5 or 6 people to chop up my territory, and I think 3 or 4 of them at least left within months. You know, 'cause it was a grind. It was a startup, and you know, you got to do everything. Book your own flights, book your own demos, learn how to do your own demos. I was doing half the installs. You know, at least the initial setup. Because if I had to wait for my systems, my SME, right, my experts, it would be weeks or months. And I'm like, I got kids to feed. I'm gonna, you know. And so the boss would want to come out, but I'm like, he never added value. He was just coming to investigate, right? And I'm like, why am I dragging you around? You know, how are you adding value to my life? And that tended it, that was more common than not,
Yeah.
unfortunately, from my
Yeah.
experience in
I
corporate
think it's still
America.
common. I mean,
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know when I ask senior people in our companies that we do business with, and I had lunch with one about 6 weeks ago. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, and whatever the answer is, I don't care. I'm just asking a question. I said, when you look at your managers, how confident are you that they can teach people how to be great at selling? And he says, I'm not confident at all. That's one of the reasons why I created this SLED program, because to me, there's like 6 things you got to do if you're going to be successful as a manager. And the first one is create the right culture. If you don't have the right culture, nothing else matters. And you have to have a culture that has capability, that actually gets people to understand that they have to plan, they have to be successful. Um, and what I have found, since I've been doing this since I started, my first management job was in '81. Um, and I woke up one day running a company. I said, we have to create a better culture. Now we were actually had a pretty good culture, but if you took the bottom half of our company, they had no culture at all. And so to me, that's the first thing. And I think the second thing you got to do is you got to figure out what kind of person do you need to hire? I mean, because, the people that you hire will either ruin you or they'll make you. And, I was in the pharmaceutical business. You know how many people I hired that had pharmaceutical sales experience out of 20?
Nope. None?
Yeah. And if I had to force rank him, Wes, he would be number 19 out of 20. And he should be 20, but the other guy fired. And, but the other people, I mean, I had a woman who hadn't worked in 10 years. But when I looked at what she'd been doing for 10 years as a single mom, I'm like, why would I want her? I hired an LPN, not an RN, an LPN. Phenomenal. The guy I told you about, I rejected him. He actually has a reject letter saying I ain't hiring him. And the day after I told him I wasn't going to hire him, I had 5 letters in my mailbox. One was he went to Auburn, and the territory was in Montgomery, Alabama. And he sends me a message. He sends me 5 letters. He doesn't send them. The governor of Alabama sends me a letter and says, "You're nuts if you don't hire this guy." The guy that he was working for says, "You're nuts if you don't hire this guy." The guy who was the biggest customer that he would call on as a physician said, "You're nuts if you don't hire this guy." The guy that he was currently working for said, "You'd be nuts not to hire this guy." And the guy that he was running the drugstore for as his second job said, "You've lost your mind if you don't hire this guy." And I'm saying, okay, if 2 people tell you you're drunk, lay down. So I called him that afternoon and I said, "This is the guy I'm telling you about that said it's not my style." I said, "I think I made a mistake." And they said, what do you mean? They said, well, I thought you said you weren't going to hire me. And I said, well, I'm not sure now. I'm going to interview you one more time. Now, at that point in time, I had to call my boss and say, hey, I think I made a mistake. Can I hire this guy? Within 2 years, he's the number one rep in the country. And about a month ago, one of the guys that he worked for after me, because he's been successful wherever he's gone, he talked about how great this guy was. And it was on LinkedIn. The guy's name is John Fuqua. And there must have been 100 people who said he was the most incredible person they'd ever met. 100. So I'm thinking, I did hire him. And he also took my place. And here's what he did was, as soon as he got my job, he fired 3 people. So why would you fire these people? And I'm a big shot at that time. He said, these people weren't working. I'm not putting up with that.
There you go.
Yeah, pretty good.
Well, what would you say? Like, what do people need to do now? Because these are crazy times. People are hard to reach. It's hard to get through to people. So much AI, cold email, these power dialers, work from home. You got to reach them on their cell phone. It's a little different right now. Like what's working?
I had somebody call me the other day, and they're calling people, and she was telling me what she said. And I said, well, look, here's what I would suggest. Number one, and I do this for nothing. I said, why don't you send me what you ordinarily say to people when you open up your call? And she gave me a couple examples over the phone, and I said, well, I would say to you that there's better ways to actually get people to want to talk to you. I wrote a book with Jeremy Mine, and it was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And Jeremy taught me a lot about tonality and the importance of tonality. But the other thing he taught me about was, how do you get people to want to listen to what you have to say by what you say? And so I told her, I said, look, number one, you probably need to say something that makes her want to talk to you. But if you go in and say, today I'd like to talk to you about, and this is the traditional kind of thing that people say in the pharmaceutical business, then what do? You basically say to somebody, I'm just like everybody else. Why the hell would you want to listen to me? What I want to do, I go in and I say, look, can we do something different today? Now, if you say that, they'll look at you and I say, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't want to sell you anything. Now, the minute I say I don't want to sell you anything, because I really don't know whether I want to sell them anything because I don't know what your situation is. And the minute you do that, you reduce sales pressure dramatically because they're not. I said, now what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a few minutes just to try and understand how do you typically deal with people like me and what kinds of things, if you were me, what would you do? And you would get probably half of the people, you won't get them all, but you probably get half of the people that would have that conversation with you. If you simply use what you said, words still matter. How do you use those words to get people to want to talk to you? I was working with a sales rep in Miami. We were sitting with a physician, and he was Cuban, and we were in Cuban whatever territory in Miami. And she begged him for 2 minutes, and you could tell he did not want to talk to her. And I was with her. And so finally, I guess he thought I was her grandfather or something, and he decided, well, hell, I better let her talk. So at the end of it, and I'm in his office, right? And so I'm looking around trying to figure out, okay, what could I have a conversation with this guy? So I said, and I teach this people a lot of time. I said, when I got ready to leave, I said, say, is it okay if I ask you a personal question? Now, I've done that a gazillion times. No one says no. When you sit, because they're dying to know, what the hell do you want to know? So I said to this guy, now again, we're in Miami. And I said, are you from Philadelphia? He said, how do you know that? I said, well, there's a picture of you over there in Veterans Stadium. I can't imagine you'd let anybody take that picture unless you were a Eagles fan. He talked to me for 20 minutes, and he gave me 12 things that she had no concept. But when I left, I said, how much of this stuff do you know? She said, no, any of it. And I said, well, all you got to do is look, everybody has on their chest, make me feel important, an invisible tattoo. And the way you make people important is you ask them questions about things that are important to them. The average person doesn't do that in sales. So we're so in a rush that we can get the pitch out. And I'm not even sure sometimes that the pitch is wrong.
Well, now everybody's trying to take shortcuts. So they'll go scrape your LinkedIn profile and Hi, Jerry. I saw that you went to VMI and I see that you write books and I see you live in Scottsdale. No, how's the weather in Scottsdale? Wow, it's been really hot summer this summer, huh? Man, maybe it's global warming, but I don't know. But hey, anyway, I just wanted to compliment you. It's like, dude, you're
Yeah. But I'm
over
like you.
personalizing.
Yeah. No, and I get that. And actually, we live in Virginia now. We moved out of Scottsdale because our office is actually near Philly. It's actually in Malvern, Pennsylvania. And I got tired of
Okay.
I was on the board of the athletic foundation at VMI where I went to school, and I just decided I'd move here. So we have a 32-acre farm, a house built in 1832. And let me say you this, Wes, don't ever buy an old house that was that old. Number one, you'll have no closet space because your wife will take it off. Secondly, all the rooms are small. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. But um, I try and get people to say, look, I was doing some work for a big company, and we do lots of work for big companies, and we do a lot of small companies too. But um, I was asking somebody, I said, how do, because a lot of our clients, they have reps that call on doctors, they're a medical device or whatnot. And so I said, well, how do physicians decide what a good rep is and what one isn't? So anyway, this company, they actually commissioned the guy to go out and talk to 500, 1,000. I don't know what the number was. It was huge. So then they said, well, look, you're creating our selling model and our coaching model. So wouldn't you want to know what this information is? I said, sure. So I called the guy and I said, what'd you learn? He said, I'll tell you, it was unbelievable. He said, we interviewed, let's say 500 people. He said 60% of them had a 2-word answer and it was the same. And I said, okay, what was the phrase? They're different. And I'm sitting there saying, I mean, that's pretty good intelligence. So I want to be seen by my customers as someone who's not like everybody else. And if you do that, you dramatically increase the likelihood that somebody's going to want to have a reasonable, meaningful discussion. Now, if I'm a manager and I'm trying to teach that, you got to watch out for what your reps do. I mean, I remember going in with one of my reps, and at the end of it, I said, look, have you ever thought about being nice to these people? Now, what's interesting about this guy, he was president of Aston Client. He was president of a big company in China. And when he got promoted, and he took me over there to go over there and work with his manager. But I told him, I said, did it ever occur to you to be nice to these people at the front desk? Now, what's interesting about this guy, the very next call, he was the nicest person you ever met. I mean, he was a brilliant guy. I mean, you told him what he needed to do, and he would do it. And he's probably the most successful person that I ever hired. But I think you have to make people feel like they matter. And I would say the vast majority of salespeople that I've seen are not great at
Yeah. I don't know if I can find it here real quick, but I just saw I'm in a big sales group on Facebook, and this young guy, he made a post yesterday, and I mean, he's mad. He's like, how do I get through these stupid gatekeepers? I mean, he's just belittling and bashing these people, and I just kind of shook my head. I'm like, I'm not even touching that one. That dude,
it.
I don't know if he can be saved, but and I'm just a member of the group. I don't own it, so I'm like, I'll
But
let
when you
others
but when you
nurture
say
him.
that's a function of poor training.
Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that I say to people, and this is why I'm so, sort of excited about what I'm doing about leadership, because to me, I had the 3 best bosses in the history of the world the first 14 years I was in the business. And what's interesting is the one was the best, he actually trained the other 2. He died last summer, and I went to his funeral, and of course I was his boss. I was 2 steps ahead of him when I got promoted to the VP GM job. But I look back on that and said, what did that guy do? And so much of what I'm basically talking about here, whether it's about, how do you do, targeted sales training? How do you coach people with meaningful feedback? And the other thing is, Gene would let people be themselves, just like I learned from John. I mean, I remember working with him, and he told me at one of my meetings, the second guy I hired, he said, you got to fire this guy. And I said, well, I just hired him 2 months ago. He said, yeah, but he can't pronounce those bacteria. I said, well, let me tell you what he can. He works 100 hours a week. I can teach him how to say Pseudomonas aeruginosa. I cannot teach him to work 100 hours a week. And I said, I'm not hiring him. He said, well, okay, if you feel that way, do it. Now, 2 years later, he's number one rep in the country. And, and I'm saying, no, but my boss let me do that. He gave me the license to be myself and to not push stuff down. But I had the first 3 years the first 14 years that I was in the business. Now, when I got to the home office, I got the turd, the guy who did not like me, and we had it out, and I won, and then he wound up working for me. But
Nice.
And it was a small thing, and it was a lot of things. People, they get mired in things that don't make any sense. And so I just took him to task and told him if he ever did it to me again, I was going to quit. And I said, I'm the best employee you've ever had, and I don't think you want me walking into your boss and telling him I'm leaving because you're a jerk. So from that point on, he was fairly nice. And then when he finally, when I got promoted, and he was 2 levels below me, my admin says he wants to talk. So he walks into the office and he says, I'm in trouble. I said, you're not in trouble. I said, you're stupid. I said, let me make this really clear to you. You have been a wonderful employee here for 30 years. I have no interest in getting rid of you, but you have to be nice. And if you can't be nice, I don't like you. Nice. He got nice 5 minutes after he left my office. But I think this is one of the reasons why when I start on my sled thing is I talk about culture. Because you have to think about culture not only for the people that you're inheriting or the people that you're going to hire, but how will they fit into your culture? And then I think the next thing you got to do is you got to figure out, all right, how do we basically figure out, how do we find people that we believe will perform at a high level?
Right.
And what I have found is that there's several things that you have to interview for that you can't get a test. I mean, you can do the, whatever the Myers-Briggs stuff is and all that stuff. But if you can't get somebody to give you an example of their sense of urgency, if you can't get somebody to tell you that they have great people skills and prove it, and if you can't tell people that if people can't give you examples of just how awfully competitive they are, then you don't want them. And so, when I interview people, those are the things that I look for. And if you have all 3 of those things, I'm not worried about what you did before. I believe you'll be successful because you clearly have already figured out how do you do.
Yep. Well, you had told that story before I hit record, but I had something similar. I was working at a company and we recruited and placed veterans leaving the service. And I created a little luncheon and networking event for academy grads. And this guy showed up and I thought I was going to land him as a client. And he said, no, I want to hire you. And I was like, I don't know a damn thing about telecommunications test and measurement. This is in June of 2000, fiber optic testing, all this stuff. He said, you're an academy grad. You'll figure it out. All right. He was a West Point grad. And I did. So I'm glad he knew what he was looking for. I made a lot of money. And because he knew what he was looking for. So, and that's why I think too, like you played sports, I played sports. And how much do you think, so like now when I do jujitsu, it's a solo sport, but you have to have training partners.
Right.
So it's a solo team event, right? But much more so than others, like karate, taekwondo, a lot of things, rarely do they go 100%. From day one in jiu-jitsu, you go 100% and you'll fight the instructor,
Yeah.
So do you look for sports, participation? Like, is that a good indicator for salespeople?
Yeah, it is. If they can prove that they have a sense of urgency, they don't have an ego, that they're competitive, and but it's interesting you say that because when I became the first guy who hired me, I asked him, I said, Jim, why did you hire me? He said, I said, because I would never, I had sold Lipton tea in a territory in Jackson, Tennessee, and I hated every minute of it. And then I was coaching football, and I wanted to be a college coach, and I got rejected from Northeast Louisiana University, and that's hard to do because if you drive by there with your window down, they'll throw a diploma in your car. And so I figured, well, hell, if I can't get into college coaching, I better get a job. So my college roommate told me to interview this guy, and he said he likes athletes. And I asked him 6 or 7 years later, I said, why did you hire me? He said, I hired you because you went to VMI. And he said, and I figured out if you can put up with all that, and you're reasonably smart, and you're decent to talk to, you got to be successful. And I thought, there's a lot to that. So no, I do think the competitiveness you can almost always tell in an athlete. But the sense of urgency is completely different. You got to get people to give you an example of what their sense of urgency is. And I learned a lot of this from, actually taking these tests. And when I would look at the tests and look at the attributes, I would find out that there's 3 or 4 things that really dominate my decision about who's any good. And it's, are you competitive at a very high degree? Can you relate to other people? And do you have a sense of urgency? Because selling, if you're any good, you got to have a sense of urgency. That doesn't mean that you have to shove yourself down somebody's throat. But if you get a live wire on, you want to make sure that you pull that thing through.
What do you say? You're talking about no ego. What's the right mix there? I mean, because a salesperson needs to be confident.
Yeah.
Right. So is it just a fine line between confidence and ego?
I think that's a great question. And I think it's probably that. I mean, I can tell you that, the most successful people I hired, they all had ego. I mean, they were all confident of themselves. But they also were measured in how they showed up like that. Now, I will tell you, we were calling on a physician one time, and the guy wrote a prescription for another product, and my guy grabbed the prescription in the middle of the air and said, you will not do that in front of me. Now, that takes confidence. Now, I'm thinking this guy's about to kill us. And the guy apologized for 15 minutes about, I shouldn't have done that. The other guy asked me to give me a prescription. So I think it's a combination of those. But I think people who have confidence, if it's the right amount of confidence, they're not going to have an overinflated ego.
Yeah.
They're going to be confident in what they can do. And I think the other thing too is that I think people who have big egos, oftentimes, in my experience, have that ego because other people tell them how great. And I mean, I get those things a lot, especially with clients. And I say, look, I'm just another person. I'm not any different than anybody else. I might be what you call a public figure, and I might be one of the top sales experts in the world, but I'm just another person. And if you ask me for help, I'm going to try and give it to you if I think I can. And that doesn't make me great. It just makes me believe that. I think, look, I learned a long time ago, nobody succeeds alone. Nobody. And somebody asked me for help. If I think it's legitimate ask, I'll help. I mean, I got some on my desk today where somebody gave me this is what I say when I call somebody. And I talked to her for about 45 minutes. And I said, look, I can't answer all your questions now, but if you'll give me some examples of what you do, I'll write it up and I'll tell you what I would say. Now, is that going to work? I don't know. But I'm confident, but I don't have an ego about it. And listen, when I walk into my house, this is what I say when I speak. And they read my bio, and my bio's fairly long and it's fairly impressive. And of course, I wrote it, but first thing I say is, let me tell you something. I mean, I really appreciate them, reading all that stuff. But when I get home tonight, here's what's going to happen when I walk through that door. Mary Ann Acuff is going to say, shut up and take the trash out because you ain't nothing.
I know. I got 7 kids. 5 of them are girls. I got a female dog. None of them are impressed with me.
But that doesn't bother me. I mean, I feel like I'm right where I need to be.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, I could go on for days, but I got some catch up to do. Got a few episodes I got to hit here back to back. So where do you want me to send people? Where you got a couple of websites I got here. I got your LinkedIn profile, but where should our listeners go to?
I think, especially if you're interested in my leadership program, you just go to jerryacuff.com, /SLED. stands for Sales Leadership Excellence Development. So jerryacuff.com at hashtag SLED. And you'll probably find out anything that you want to know. And we're pretty easy to reach. We've got a great team of people that I could never do without. I mean, they do things I can't do, and they brought stuff to our organization that I'm not smart enough to figure out. But we got a great group of people, and we do really, really good. And a lot of people don't do what we do. We actually will take a product and we'll say, we'll show you how to sell this if you're having trouble selling. And I don't know of any companies that'll do that. We'll do our own diagnosis, and we'll come back and say, in fact, the call I had before this was one of those. But I've got enough confidence in myself because I've been doing this for an awful long time that if you tell me what your issues are, and I will show you how to. I mean, we got some data the other day from a company that they paid us, I don't know what it was, but it was a decent money. But we increased their business by $100 million in less than a year. But we're pretty good at what we do. Now, I will tell you, we've done about 250 of those in the 24 years we've been in business. And we failed twice. And those failures were in the early 20s. I mean, 2021, not 2021,
2001, yeah.
And that was because I had the wrong person who was watching those projects. But I mean, if somebody hires us, we actually get results, period. And if we don't, they don't hire us again.
Yeah, for sure. Well, all right. Jerry Acuff.
Great to meet you, my friend.
Great to catch up with you. And I'm looking forward to, I'm going to go check out your sled. And if I get out to Virginia, I'll give you a call.
Yeah, I'd love to see you. Actually, one of my customers is coming in this weekend. One of our biggest clients. Well, his son goes to school here. So, so I told him I'd take him to get sushi.
In Virginia?
Yeah.
All right.
Listen, we got the best sushi restaurant, and the guy's actually from Japan.
Okay.
Yeah, no, he's the real deal. This is not Kroger sushi.
But still, I'd take him for some, when in Rome, right? Go get some barbecue.
Well, we have that too.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you very much. I hope you feel better.
All right, Jerry. Great catching up with you. And
I appreciate you having me on.
All right, man.
Thank you.